in most classic terms in our Dharma, on our path, it is what often people encounter as they are, as the awakening process in them quickens, starts to accelerate, becomes catalyzed, whatever term you like. And that often happens, just being is at work. But it can also be stimulated by sittings, by teacher sessions, by intensive workshops in a lot of different ways. The good news is that we do have the freedom, and I believe the choice or capacity to titrate, to slow things down a bit if they get to be too much, or when we're ready to kind of pump them up also. So we can talk more about that in a bit. So this, our language for this is the unraveling of seeking and fixing strategies. That's one phrase that we use for this pre-whole being awakening, whole being realization. The unraveling of fixing and seeking strategies. So most of us, mostly in our lives, are all about fixing what's wrong, making it right, seeking, seeking love and joy and enlightenment and answers and whatever all those things are, depending on who we are, that we've been seeking. So unraveling is a very potent term, and if you've ever seen anything unravel literally in the world, then you know what that's like. It's like there's a structure, there's maybe a pattern, there's something concrete that begins to disappear. The pattern disappears, the actual structure falls apart. I think in terms of fiber, because I was a fiber artist and still am to some degree. And so I have actually unraveled sweaters. The other place this can show up, or does show up, this way of being, this experience, is in the sacred reconfiguration. So the kind of progression, and it's not linear as much as we'd like it to be, nice and tidy, step 1, step 2, step 3. It's not linear. And so when I talk about unraveling and fixing, seeking strategies, so that can happen before whole being realization, before the drop into the core paradox. And it can but this can also persist. This experience can persist beyond, or we can cycle in and out of it. We can oscillate in and out of it. And that is a phase or a stage that we call sacred reconfiguration. So it's the rearranging, the reconfiguring of parts of our being into a whole new configuration, a whole new way of being. And part of that can be extremely uncomfortable. This can be called the dark night of the soul. You've probably heard that phrase quite a bit, particularly in spiritual realms. And it's an apt term. There can be a feeling of darkness. There can be a feeling of meaninglessness, depression. Those of us that tend towards irritation and anger, there can be some of that going on. Like, why is my life not working? Like, I'm trying so hard. Frustration. The strategies and tactics that we've been using no longer serve us. And that can be obvious, or it can be not so obvious. It can be we keep hammering away at it, and, in the past where something would cut loose or ease up or feel better, it doesn't anymore. Our addictions can become quite loud. And again, there can be this sort of cycling through where things sort of quiet down and we feel a little bit better, and then all of a sudden, and it isn't necessarily anything in particular that we see or do or are aware of. It can be somewhat mysterious oscillations. There can be a lot of fear with this. Because really, we operate, much of our life, we operate under the illusion that we're in control. Really, right? Predict and control. Like, I'm in charge here. I'm driving this bus. And when the evidence flies in the face of that, oh, I'm doing what I always did and it's not working. Who is driving this bus? That can be incredibly unnerving. It can be scary, confusing, definitely a sense of being out of control. So that's how it was for me. I cried a lot, and I didn't used to be a crier. Like, I spent much of my life, maybe most of my life, not crying. So I cried a lot. I couldn't stop crying once I would start. I felt I was a hot mess. I love that term because it was just perfect. You know, that's exactly how I felt and how I was showing up in some situations and a lot of situations. There was also a listlessness, so a just real difficulty generating energy to do almost anything. You know, the very, very most basic things got attended to, mostly. But I just really didn't care and couldn't summon it. I just couldn't, you know, I just didn't give a hoop. So there was a lot of embarrassment for me around that because I had always projected a facade of having it all together. And it wasn't that I did, but I had a pretty flat affect and I had good, you know, pretty good coping skills. And I, you know, I guess I had done some personal work. And so some parts of my life I had done my work, if you will, and could talk about that and process that. But I was embarrassed, you know, I was embarrassed to be the one sobbing. I was embarrassed to be the one who didn't know what the heck was going on. I was embarrassed to be the one. I mean, by that time I had been a coach for, I don't know, 12 or 14 years. And so I was the one holding space for people. I was the one guiding and supporting. And I had to just step out of that. I mean, it wasn't that I had to step out of it. It just fell away, you know. I mean, I still carried on my business to the best of my ability. But when I was in Trillium sittings or safe places, I was embarrassed. I felt some shame. And maybe one of the biggest factors was that I had a tremendous amount of resistance to the process. I didn't understand it, and it didn't seem to be leading anywhere good. And so I resisted. I had a huge amount of resistance. I didn't want to take my white-knuckled hands off the steering wheel of my life, even though, you know, it's almost like if you could imagine this image of me white-knuckling, steering wheel in my hand, but the steering wheel doesn't go anywhere, like there's no vehicle there, or, you know, but I'm hanging on, by God, I'm going to steer this vehicle, you know. I can look back on it now and laugh, but it was not funny in the time that I was experiencing it. So you've heard the term, you've heard probably the phrase, resistance is futile. Actually, although I guess that's true, I mean, you know, having a Trillium peer greenlight my resistance for me was a huge opening in my world at that time. Just to make it okay, like, oh, that's okay. I was resistant too. You can be resistant. It's all welcome. And what I understand now is that resistance is the way shower. Like wherever it is that you're holding resistance, that is the best part. That is what wants your attention. That is what wants your presence. That is what wants to be seen, to be heard, to be felt. That's where being wants you to go. And the resistance is the flashing red light. It's the flashing red light. And so as soon as you green light it, or for me anyway, I mean, I guess I can't make any guarantees for you, but as soon as I green lighted it, then things got accelerated really fast, really, really fast. It doesn't mean that I felt better, you know, because what I was resisting was going some places I didn't want to go. So this kind of cycles back to what you had said earlier, Sherry. I think you're absolutely right that in this sacred reconfiguration phase, you now have the capacity, that's a beautiful word, you now have this capacity to see, to feel, to go places you couldn't go before, that were not safe. It just wasn't possible. It wasn't possible. So now you have that capacity. And again, it doesn't make it fun, you know. It doesn't mean it's going to feel good. Ultimately, yes. Ultimately, on the other side of that wave, there is oxygen, there is sunshine, there is bliss, there is relief. It's not 24/7, or if it is 24/7, it won't last forever. It's not 365 24/7. It will last for a period of time until the next wave, until the next resistance comes up. So green lighting is such a beautiful term, and most people who come into this work immediately love it, you know, glom onto it. I know I did, but I didn't do it. I just liked the idea. And when I remembered, I would practice to the best of my ability, but I had to be reminded over and over and over again. And I still get reminders. I still, you know, it's maybe the never-ending story. So I think green lighting is the key. I think what happens when we green light is that we begin to develop this muscle, this awakening muscle called trust in being. It's not something that you can gin up. It's not something that you can just decide, I'm going to choose to trust in being. I don't think, or at least that wasn't my path. I didn't just choose it. I like the idea of it, but I had to practice green lighting in order to develop the muscle of trust in being. And once that muscle begins to get developed, then you know that you can go those hard places, and you can also go those ecstatic places, which might also be scary. You know, not feeling resistance to feeling pain and processing and, you know, emotional stuff. A lot of us experience that for sure. A lot of us are in that camp. But a lot of us are also in the camp of not being willing to feel pleasure, not being willing to feel the good stuff, being afraid of that too. Like, oh my gosh, you know, what would happen if, or not even having it be conscious, but just having been shut down in that area for so long that we don't even know how to go there. So the trust in being is that permission that we get to go where we need to go, wherever it happens to be, in all of the oscillations, and then in the eventual calming of those tides, if you will, where the flow is easier to manage and experience.